They saw an old man hunched over in the corner of a quiet diner. Wrinkled hands, slow steps, soft voice. To most, he was invisible, until the day someone pushed too far. What happened next? No one could have seen it coming. Hey friend, today's story is one of those that grabs you by the heart and doesn't let go. It's about a man who spent years living in the shadows of his past, hiding who he really was. People laughed at him, dismissed him, treated him like he was just some harmless relic of a forgotten time. But buried under those quiet eyes and tattered clothes was a storm. One trained, calculated, and waiting. You'll follow the journey of a small town that underestimated him, and the moment everything changed. There's heartbreak, loyalty, redemption, and a reveal so powerful, it'll leave you speechless. This isn't just a story about a man with a past. It's about how strength doesn't always look the way we expect. So grab a snack, get comfy, and let's dive into one of the most unforgettable stories we've ever shared. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have a special story for you. On a quiet cul-de-sac lined with identical beige houses and perfectly trimmed hedges, lived a man named Harold. Most folks in the neighborhood didn't know his last name. Some thought it was Henderson. Others figured he was just Mr. Harold. The way kids say Mr. before a first name, when they're not quite sure what to call someone. He lived alone in the corner house on Maple Street, the one with the fading paint on the shutters and a stubborn patch of dead grass the HOA never stopped complaining about every morning. Just after sunrise, Harold shuffled down his driveway to collect the newspaper. Always the same cardigan, always the same slow, steady walk. He never waved first, but if someone greeted him, he'd tip his head politely and offer a barely there smile. The kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. The neighbors whispered, of course they always do. He's harmless, some said. Poor guy's probably got early dementia, others added. Kids had their own version. They called him Scary Harry and dared each other to ring his doorbell at Halloween, even though he never answered. Harold didn't mind. Or at least if he did, he never showed it. The HOA, however, did mind. A lot. They hated the uncut ivy creeping along his fence. They hated the old pickup truck in his driveway with a cracked windshield. And they especially hated that he never came to meetings. Nancy, the HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood queen, had even once suggested he was a squatter. Has anyone ever seen his deed? She asked, sipping her iced tea with suspicion. But Harold had lived there longer than most of them. Bought the place back when the town was still growing, before the neighborhood had gates and rules and overpriced lawn inspectors, back when nobody cared what color your trash bins were or how many inches your grass grew past regulation height. Still, he never argued. When the HOA sent a notice, he'd quietly fix what needed fixing, paint the mailbox, cut the grass. He didn't fight back, didn't complain, just nodded and carried on. Sometimes he could be seen sitting on his porch at dusk, staring out toward the horizon like he was waiting for someone who'd never come. A single porch light glowing above him, the only splash of warmth on an otherwise cold, quiet house. No one really knew Harold. Not the real Harold. Not what he'd seen or what he'd done. To the world, he was just an old man, slowly fading into the background of a neighborhood obsessed with neatness and order. But someone should have noticed the way he watched people, not lazily, but carefully. Or the way his eyes, though tired, never missed a thing. Someone should have realized he was never just an old man. It started with a letter about the grass. The HOA claimed Harold's lawn was exactly 2.5 inches too high, violating subsection B4 of the community code. The envelope was hand-delivered by Nancy herself, the HOA president, short, sharp-tongued, and always dressed like she had a courtroom to walk into. She stood on Harold's porch like she owned it, lips tight, arms crossed, eyes scanning his windows like she expected to find something illegal inside. Harold opened the door quietly, nodded once, took the letter, and closed it. Again, no words, no argument. By sunset the next day, the lawn was mowed, but that only encouraged them. The following week it was the mailbox, too faded. Then his curtains, visible from the street and not the approved shade of off-white. After that, it was a decorative, Wind chime. Noise violation, Nancy said, though it barely made a sound unless the wind blew just right. It didn't matter. They kept coming. Citation after citation. Paperwork shoved in his mailbox, photos taped to his door. All signed with a smug little smile from Nancy and her clipboard posse. To everyone else, it looked like a game. And Harold? He looked like the perfect opponent. Quiet, alone, old, easy to beat. He never protested. Just nodded, fixed what they asked, and disappeared back inside. That only made them bolder. Nancy began telling neighbors that Harold was a problem homeowner, someone who didn't respect the rules. It's about keeping the neighborhood beautiful, she'd say at meetings, sipping her tea and flashing a practiced smile. But behind closed doors, she was pushing for more. She even floated the idea that Harold might be mentally unfit, that maybe the HOA should take steps to have him removed. Harold never reacted. Not when Nancy shouted at him from her driveway for having leaves in his gutter. Not when 2 HOA board members knocked on his door with a warning about possible fines. Not even when no one admitted who spray-painted "Follow the Rules" on his garage door one night. The next morning, Harold scrubbed the paint off without a word. No police report, no drama. Just a bucket, a sponge, and silence. To the neighborhood, it confirmed what they already believed. Harold was harmless, weak, just an old man slowly being pushed out by the world around him. No one noticed the way. He watched them from behind his curtains. No one asked why he never blinked when Nancy screamed at him, and no one thought to wonder why. No matter how far they pushed, he never once flinched. They thought they were winning. But the truth was, Harold wasn't losing. He was waiting. The house next door had been empty for months. Just another beige shell with a "for sale" sign slowly rotting in the sun. Then one morning, a black pickup truck with tinted windows pulled into the driveway, and by afternoon, the house was full of life. Not the good kind. Not the kind that brought lemonade and handshakes. 3 men moved in. Big guys, the kind with heavy boots, loud laughs, and the kind of eyes that didn't smile when their mouths did. They said they were contractors, fixing the place up. But they didn't wear tool belts and no one saw a single permit. Instead, music blasted until 2 in the morning. Cars came and went at odd hours. Strangers lingered outside, smoking the yard and eyeing neighbors like they didn't care who was watching. The HOA didn't say a word. Nancy, the queen of noise complaints and curtain inspections, suddenly lost her voice. Some said she tried to talk to them once and was told to mind her own business. Others whispered that she'd been paid off. Either way, the rule book she loved. So much stayed firmly closed. Harold didn't complain. He didn't call the cops. He didn't even shut his windows when the music shook the walls. He just watched. Sometimes from his porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. Sometimes from the second-floor window, where the curtain moved just enough to catch a glimpse of the driveway below. Always quiet. Always still. At first, the new neighbors ignored him. To them, he was just some old man with bad posture and a rusting pickup. But over time, they started to notice. One of them, a wiry guy with a tattoo creeping up his neck, stared back once, trying to intimidate him. Harold didn't blink, didn't look away. That unsettled them more than they'd admit. It wasn't long before things escalated. A neighbor's dog disappeared. Packages went missing. A teenage boy got shoved when he biked too close to their yard. People started locking their doors in the middle of the day. The neighborhood that used to obsess over hedge heights now stayed quiet. Eyes down, mouths shut. Except for Harold. He never said a word, but he never looked away either. He stood on his porch one night as the men dragged something heavy into the garage. They paused when they saw him. One of them muttered something under his breath. Harold didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just stood there, watching. Not curious, not afraid. Almost like he was remembering something. Measuring, calculating. The new neighbors had no idea what they were walking into. But Harold did. Lena was the kind of girl who noticed everything. 16, smart, with earbuds always tucked in and a camera slung over her shoulder, snapping photos for the school paper. She lived 2 doors down from Harold and used to wave at him from her bike. even when he didn't wave back. Most kids were scared of Scary Harry, but not Lena. She called him Mr. Harold when her mom wasn't listening and once left a slice of cake on his porch after the 4th of July. He never said thank you, but the plate was returned, clean the next day. One afternoon, Lena was walking home from school when she saw something. She'd stopped near the new neighbor's garage just for a second, camera in hand. Something was open. Something that shouldn't have been. She leaned in, snapped a photo, then quickly turned away, looking pale. That night, the music didn't play. The next morning, Lena was gone. Her mother knocked on every door, voice trembling, eyes wide. By noon, half the block was outside, murmuring and pacing, hands on hips and phones in hand. The police came, took statements, walked the street. No one had seen anything, not a thing. Not even Harold, they assumed. But around sunset, he walked up Lena's driveway. He didn't knock, just stood there waiting until her mother opened the door. She looked like she hadn't slept. Mascara smudged, voice hoarse. Harold didn't ask questions. He simply said in a voice so low she had to lean in to hear it, "I'll find her." Then he turned and walked away. No one knew what to make of it. Harold, probably confused. The neighborhood told Lena's mom not to get her hopes up. "The police will handle it," they said, though their voices weren't convincing. Everyone was scared, and fear made people pretend. But Harold didn't pretend. That night, the lights in his house stayed on past midnight. A dull glow from the garage window flickered behind drawn blinds. The next morning, his usual paper remained, untouched on the driveway. He wasn't on the porch, wasn't at the window. It was like he'd vanished, but he hadn't. He was already out there, silent, invisible, and focused. Because the second Lena disappeared, Harold stopped being just a neighbor and started being exactly what he was trained to be. Harold didn't come back that night, or the next morning. His porch light stayed off. His newspaper collected dust on the driveway, and the neighborhood whispered like it always did. Some said he'd wandered off. Others figured he'd finally checked into a home. Nancy from the HOA muttered something about old men not being built for stress. But late that evening, just as the sky turned a muddy orange and the cicadas began to, Harold's garage door creaked open. He stepped out like he hadn't been gone at all, but something was different. The way he stood wasn't the way old men stand. His shoulders were squared, his back straight. The slow shuffle was gone. Every step he took was purposeful, like the ground itself knew better than to resist him. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But if you happened to look at him just then, you'd feel it in your gut. He wasn't the same. The next morning, he opened the garage again and walked to the far corner, past paint cans and dusty boxes. He reached behind a crooked shelving unit and pulled out a long-forgotten trunk. It was old, steel, scratched, and locked with two thick clasps that hadn't been touched in years. Harold opened it with a key he wore around his neck, hidden under his collar for decades. Inside was a life no one in the neighborhood could have imagined. A worn military ID with a face just a little younger, a little harder, a different name. Next to it, two sidearms wrapped in oiled cloth, still clean. A folded set of black fatigues. A tattered photograph of a group of men in desert gear, all with the same look in their eyes. Focused, unblinking. Maps marked with red ink. Surveillance photos, notes, coordinates. A combat knife still sharp enough to cut through time. And at the bottom of the trunk, a radio. Not a cheap walkie-talkie, but the kind of device used when no one else was supposed to be listening. Harold laid everything out slowly, methodically. No wasted movement. His hands, though lined with age, were steady, controlled. He opened a faded notebook and began writing. Names, addresses, times. He circled one of the photos and whispered something under his breath, just loud enough for no one to hear. For the first time in years, Harold didn't look tired. He looked alive. The neighborhood had poked and prodded him for years, thinking he was just another fragile old man with nothing left to give. Now, beneath the hum of sprinklers and chirping crickets, something old and dangerous had come awake. They thought the quiet man next door had no teeth. They never thought to ask where he'd left his claws. Long before Maple Street and Curtin complaints, Harold went by another name. A name that didn't show up on tax records or retirement forms. In the military, they called him Hawk. Not because he flew, but because he saw everything. Every movement, every weakness, every lie. He wasn't regular infantry. He wasn't even special forces in the way most understood. Harold was part of a program so buried in black ink that only a handful of people ever knew it existed. No patches, no medals, just results. His job was extraction. Get in, get them out, leave. No trail. He didn't kick down doors. He slipped through shadows, studied patterns, and struck before anyone knew there was a threat. Eastern Europe was his last mission. Cold, muddy, and wrapped in the kind of silence that always meant something was wrong. His team was sent to retrieve a hostage from a warlord's compound. But the intel was off. There were too many men, too many guns, and the hostage. She was already gone. They walked into a slaughter. Harold survived. Barely. 3 of his brothers didn't. He didn't go home after that. Not really. The army offered a desk, a medal, a quiet send-off. He said nothing and disappeared. Bought a house in a nameless neighborhood. Faded into the background like a ghost who didn't want to haunt anymore. For years, he let the world forget him. He let his hands grow soft, his back bend. Let people believe he was just an old man in a dying pickup truck, and he was fine with that, until Lena. She reminded him of the hostage they never saved. Brave, curious, unafraid to look monsters in the face. He hadn't realized how much she mattered until she was gone, and then it was too late to pretend he wasn't who he used to. In the quiet of his garage, Harold ran his fingers over the combat knife he hadn't touched in 20 years. The grip still remembered him. The balance still felt like home. He strapped the sidearm to his thigh, packed a radio, a flashlight, 2 clean shirts, and the photograph of his old team. Just 5 men in the snow, smiling because they'd made it out that time. He looked at their faces for a long moment before folding it back into his pocket. This wasn't about glory. It wasn't about redemption either. It was about a girl who waved to him when no one else did, and men who needed to learn, really learn, what happens when you take someone that doesn't belong to you. Harold stepped out into the night, moving, like the shadows remembered him. The ghost was back, and this time he wasn't leaving empty-handed. The street was quiet by 2 a.m. Lights off, sprinklers ticking in rhythm. The same suburban hush that made people feel safe. But Harold wasn't listening to sprinklers. He was listening to footsteps, to whispered voices through thin drywall, to the sound of weapons being racked in the dark. He moved like smoke, gliding from his backyard to the fence line and over it in one slow, practiced motion. The men inside the house next door were sloppy, overconfident. They thought no one was watching. They thought no one could watch. Harold had studied them for days, knew their shift patterns, the way one always lit a cigarette at the back door. Around 2:15, right on schedule, the door creaked open. One man stepped out, muttering into his phone. He never saw Harold come up behind him, never felt the arm wrap around his throat. Just dropped quietly to the concrete like a sack of wet laundry. Inside, the house smelled like sweat and bleach. Empty pizza boxes on counters. A duffel bag of cash left out like it was nothing. But it was the laptop on the kitchen table that confirmed everything. Open emails, coded logs, pictures. Harold didn't need to read all of it. He knew this language. Knew what it meant when addresses matched timestamps. And he saw Lena's name. She wasn't here. They'd moved her. One man was still awake, dozing on the couch with a handgun across his lap. Harold didn't give him time to react. A swift motion, silent, clean. No sound but the faint clatter of the gun hitting the floor. He left the house, without a single footprint behind. By sunrise, flashing lights painted the street in red and blue. Someone found the bodies. No one knew how. No one saw anything. But the neighborhood swarmed like a kicked anthill. Cameras, gurneys, questions. Nancy stood outside in a bathrobe, mouth hanging open. Harold, standing on his porch, sipped coffee like always. He didn't look tired. He didn't look shaken. He just looked ready, because he had everything he needed now, and he was going to get her back. The news hit Maple Street like a thunderclap. 2 dead men found in the house next to Harold's. No signs of forced entry. No witnesses. Just blood, silence, and questions no one wanted to ask out loud. Karen was the first to spiral. She marched up and down the block in her robe, clipboard in hand like it could shield her from the fear creeping into every corner. "We have to call an emergency meeting," she whispered to anyone who would listen. "We let a killer live here. I always said there was something off about him." By noon, the HOA board was in full meltdown. They met in the clubhouse, eyes darting, voices hushed, like gossip might summon something. Nancy pushed to file a formal complaint against Harold. Again. But even she didn't sound convinced. No one wanted to be the one to knock on his door. Then the police arrived. They questioned Harold. Calm, polite. He offered them tea. He told them he was home all night, reading. Even handed over his old weathered journal, marked with timestamps and notes. It all checked out. The officers left without incident, but the bodies kept showing up, one in a motel across town, another by the riverbed, always quiet, always clean, no fingerprints, no cameras, no leads, just one pattern. Each man had ties to the house next door, and one by one, they were disappearing. Maple Street changed overnight. Garage doors stayed shut. Joggers stopped jogging. Curtains were drawn tight. The same people who once mocked Harold now glanced nervously at his house, wondering what else. They never saw. Karen tried to act brave. She spoke louder in meetings, talked about community defense. But her eyes gave her away. Everyone knew the truth now. Someone was out there cleaning up what the law couldn't. And they were starting to realize Harold wasn't the one to be afraid of. He was the one keeping the monsters at bay. The warehouse stood alone on the outskirts of town, wrapped in rust and silence. No signs, no guards outside. But Harold knew better. He'd followed the trail, burner phones, coded texts, stolen van routes, and it all led here. Inside, it smelled like oil, sweat, and something darker. Shadows shifted behind crates, low, voices. A girl's muffled cry. Harold moved through the dark like he belonged there. Every step deliberate, every breath measured. The first man never even saw him. A quick strike, then silence. The second put up a fight. Young, fast, full of rage, but Harold was faster. Years of training hummed in his veins like muscle memory. A knife to the leg, a strike to the throat, and it was done. By the time the third man raised his gun, Harold was already behind him. One twist, one snap. Floor. He found Lena locked in a storage room, eyes wide, shaking. She didn't speak, just threw her arms around him. He held her for a moment, then said softly, "It's over now." Before leaving, Harold placed a drive. On the desk, photos, names, routes, everything the police would need, and one note scribbled in plain black ink. Never underestimate an old man. Lena came home 2 days later, escorted by police cars and wrapped in a blanket. Her mother wept on the front lawn, holding her like she'd never let go again. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, stunned into silence. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Harold had brought her back. Karen came by the next morning, with a pie and a stiff apology. "We misjudged you," she mumbled, not meeting his eyes. Harold nodded once, thanked her, then closed the door without another word. That same afternoon, a real estate sign went up on his front lawn. No warning, no explanation. Just silence. Lena visited him the next evening. She found him sitting on the porch, watching the sun sink low behind the rooftops. He handed her a small, weathered compass, the metal worn smooth from years of use. She turned it over in her hands, confused. "When you're lost," he said softly, "trust your instinct." She looked up to say something, but he was already standing, already walking away. No suitcase, no goodbye. Just the steady sound of boots on pavement. By sunrise, he was gone. But Maple Street would never forget the quiet man they once tried to push out. Because he wasn't just a neighbor. He was the storm they never saw coming.